Well, good morning, everybody. I thought the weather outside is frightful was a Christmas thing, but apparently it's not this weekend. And we're so glad that we can still get together digitally over the weekend and let God speak to us from His Word today. I want to give credit for the series that we're currently doing to Dr. James White, who is a pastor, author, former seminary president, all kinds of things in his title, from Charlotte, North Carolina. And we got the idea for this series from his church in Charlotte. Last week we started this series, and we're calling it Less is More, where we've been talking about the frenetic pace of life that we live in and how to navigate it in a way that honors God and still maintain some sense of sanity in your world. We began last week with a message about pace and about how keeping the Sabbath is not only an obedient decision, but also one that in the long run will help you maintain a healthier lifestyle every single week. Today, I want to get practical about how to categorize and manage the many activities that take up the majority of your time and the time of your family, for instance. So let's start with a quote from a classic little book on time management. Charles Hummel, in his little book, The Tyranny of the Urgent, said, "Your greatest danger is letting the urgent things crowd out the important things." We all face the challenge in life of deciding what is truly important versus what is urgent. Sometimes that challenge is thrust upon us unexpectedly. Sometimes that challenge is the making of our own choices and decisions. You know, there's an old story that's told about a lighthouse keeper who lived on a rocky coastline somewhere in New England. And one time a month, he would receive a month's supply of oil to keep the light burning for the safety of passing ships. Well, one night, early in the month, a lady who lived nearby stopped by and asked if she could have some oil to keep her burning stove lit because she had run out. She needed to keep her family warm. And so he gave her a little bit of oil. Another day, a neighbor man stopped by and he needed some oil for his lamps in his home. On a different day, another man needed oil to lubricate something in his barn. And all of these requests were legitimate requests, and so the lighthouse keeper did his best to make everyone happy and to be generous by meeting their needs. But toward the end of the month, he had run out of oil, and he couldn't keep the big light of the lighthouse lit for the passing ships. And later that night, several ships crashed on the rocks, and countless numbers of shipmates lost their lives. When authorities investigated the cause of all the accidents, he was so apologetic and felt horrible about what had happened. And he tried to tell them of all the reasonable requests that he had had for oil from people, for warmth and for light. And, well, their response to all of his excuses for running out of oil, they said, you were given oil for one purpose and only one purpose: to keep the big light lit for the ships that were passing by. I wonder, which lights should you really keep burning in your life? And better yet, which lights don't really need to be burning at all? What seemingly urgent lights are you trying to keep lit, but if you really stopped long enough to truly consider them, you'd conclude that they aren't really that important in the grand scheme of life and eternity? When considering questions like those, there is an overarching principle that we need to keep in the forefront of our minds as children of God. The psalmist said, "But I trust in you, Lord. I say you are my God, and my times are in your hands." You see, ultimately, our times Our years, our days, hours, and even every second of our lives are in the hands of a loving God whom we can trust. But we have to learn how to simplify our lives by taking care of what is really the most important things so that they aren't pushed aside by the cries of the alleged urgent things in our lives. And to do so, we need to look to the scriptures. You see, God's word suggests that we live with both priority and balance, not one or the other. I think sometimes when we think about managing the pace of our lives, we think it's all about having the right priorities. You know, God first, followed by, marriage and family, and then career and church and faith life, service to others, all kinds of different things. But I'd say, practically speaking, there's more to it than that. Now, don't get me wrong. Priorities matter. After all, Jesus said, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." Seek first clearly identifies what should be the greatest priority of our lives as believers: the kingdom of God and righteous, obedient living for Christ. But on another occasion, Jesus is asked what the greatest commandment was. And he said, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength." And the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No commandment is greater than these, he said. I want you to notice the sense of balance in that answer. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. These represent every facet of who you are and how you live as a human being in this world. And then Jesus said that loving others is equally important. He's clearly saying that we need to balance all of these things in daily life. What's more, when you think about it, very few daily choices that we make are simply black and white. Or, do I do this and not do that? It's much more complex than that. Do I put my kid in this sport or play on this team, or should we save the time and the money so that we can have a family vacation? Do I work late today and struggle to meet that deadline with a really good and polished proposal, or do I leave work so that I can make my kids or my grandkids recital that night? Do I serve in the church's children's ministry or at the Giving Center? Or should I volunteer at my kid's school? See, life is filled with all of these little judgment calls, if you will, that bombard us every day and every week. So how do we live out life with both balance and priority when it comes to all the things that we have going on in our personal and family lives? Well, I would suggest to you that there are 4 areas of priority to balance. Now, the first thing that I want you to notice about this is that God is in the center of the circle, or of the pie, if we want to look at it like that. As the people of God, as sons and daughters of God and believers of Jesus, all of our daily living must be centered by the God whom we can trust with everything. And then I would suggest that there are 4 primary areas of priority: our relationships, our work or your career, spiritual things, and I'll include the church there, and then community. So let me make a few comments about each of these 4 areas, and then I want you to consider 3 questions to apply to them in order to live with both priority and balance. So the first one is relationships. This includes all of your relationships. It includes your relationship with God, your relationship with your husband or your wife, your relationships with your children, and that one looks different depending on the stage of your life. Your relationship with your grandchildren, your relationship with extended family, your relationships with friends and coworkers and casual acquaintances. And we could talk about all kinds of biblical references for how we should live in those relationships. But I think all of them probably boil down to looking out for one another more than looking out for ourselves. The Apostle Paul said, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. You see, selfless living is really important for our lives because relationships affect every area of our lives. And so it must be a major priority for us. The second area is work, your work life, your career. You know, this requires about half of your waking hours every week, 50% of the time that you aren't sleeping. I realize there are some variables here, depending on your job and how many hours of sleep you get per night and how many you need, frankly, and so on. But regardless, it's a lot. Work takes up a lot of our time, and this category includes anything that you do as your primary labor to support your family. The Apostle Paul, again, said, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human beings. So this area might be working somewhere that gives you a paycheck, but it also includes the stay-at-home mom or dad who works every bit as much or more than the typical job. And let's not forget that in our society, most moms and dads both work and raise a family. It's a never-ending responsibility and must be a priority. The third area is your spiritual life and the church. Now, I put these two things together because I believe the Bible clearly instructs that they go together. Look at how they're linked in this passage. Ephesians chapter 4, Paul says, this will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and our knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. Now he says he's talking about believers in a local body, the church, as he says there at the end. Can you grow spiritually on an individual level with Christ? Absolutely you can, and you should. But you cannot grow to your fullest potential in Christ absent of the involvement in and with other believers in the church. It is an oxymoron belief to suggest otherwise. Your spiritual life with Christ must include the church, and the spiritual vitality of the church must include you. And that takes time investments and priority in your life. Finally, the last area I'm calling community. And what I mean by that is it includes anything that you're involved in that is not included in the other three areas, but specifically those things that contribute to the good of your communities. So think your school system if you're raising kids in a family. All of its opportunities, games and concerts and athletic and music boosters and volunteering and so on and so forth. Think about your town, your village, your city, community organizations and events that you might participate in, places that you might go. Think about the charitable organizations that you engage and volunteer with. You know, places, like Bags of Love is an organization nearby, the United Way, or a local hospital that you volunteer at. Now, I see all of these things, and I see this particular area of priority is particularly important as it relates to opportunities to be missional in the way that you live, opportunities for you to share Christ with other people. It was the Apostle Peter who said, but in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord and always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And do it always with gentleness and respect. This is about telling other people about Jesus and what he's done in your life. And that kind of mindset, quite honestly, can apply in all four of these primary areas of priority. but I think it is especially important when we are out in the communities in which we live every week. See, all four of these areas we need to balance them. And while the diagram seems to suggest that each area has an equal size piece of the pie, if you will, that's not necessarily true. And it frankly, it changes from time to time. You see, no one area necessarily supersedes all of the others all of the time. There might be a season where your work requires and demands are greater than normal, and so it necessitates more time and effort. There might be an illness or treatments that go along with an illness and that demand more attention, maybe for one of your kids or for a parent or another relative. There could be a season where your involvement in ministry requires more time and more effort. I can remember the days many years ago we used to do a dinner theater every December. Well, we would start working on that back in like August. And for those like 4 months, people around here would put in a ton of time and effort in preparation for those dinner theater events. That required more time and investment. You see, the priorities of life are not necessarily of equal size as it relates to these four areas, and not always equally balanced. What is most important to remember is that these four are all the major priorities that I think the Bible tells us repeatedly that we need to pay attention to and give priority to. So, I said I wanted I was going to give you 3 questions to ask yourself to kind of assess or evaluate how you're doing with these areas of priority. Number 1, what are you adding to these priorities in your life? What thing, what activity, what takes up a measurable amount of time or effort or resources that does not fall into one of these 4 priority areas? Now listen, don't write this question off. Really take some time to reflect on this. Husbands and wives, reflect on it together. Here's the thing. Most of us add things and don't even realize the amount of time and resources that it is taking from our lives. Noted business and leadership author Jim Collins has written that the majority of people don't need to make to-do lists to be more productive. They need to make stop doing lists. Can I just mention for a moment one of the things that has become wildly popular and is mainstream in our culture right now? It's gambling, especially sports gambling. It has become so commonplace nowadays because casinos are everywhere and online gambling through your phone is so convenient and so easy. And yet, I would bet that most people engaged in it have added this to their life and have never really thought about how much time and frankly how much money it takes away from their life and their families. I know the argument is, you're trying to make more money for your family. I hope you realize that the odds are stacked against you, but I also know that there are some people that in order to place the bets that they're making on this team or that team or on the prop bets that are such a big part of it nowadays, they're spending all kinds of time researching players and teams and they're researching all of that. And that all takes time away from other priorities in your life. And most have no idea of that time investment. They just don't even think about it. For most, this gambling thing, it's been added to our lives just in the last 5 years or so. So that's one example. There are others. Reflect on what you are adding to your priorities. Perhaps there are some things that you just have to say no to. including some really good things. You need to say no because you have to maintain balance in your life. You were made by God for balance. It's where you will thrive as his child, as a human being who was made in his image. It's where you'll be best positioned to make the most impact in this world and on your kids and your grandkids. That happens when your life is balanced. Because when it's not in balance, you end up missing opportunities. Or you just simply turn them down because you just don't have the time. So what are the things in your life that need to be reduced or maybe even eliminated? Because you've added it without really considering its impact. Question number 2. What have you subtracted from the 4 priority areas? Which of those 4 primary areas has been unnecessarily reduced or eliminated from your life? See, if you leave out 1 or 2 areas, you're going to be out of balance for how God designed you to live your best life. Contrary to our practice, your life will not be simplified or made more productive by adding. You'll become more productive and successful by subtracting or reducing. You see, adding usually just complicates life. Again, don't blow this off. Spend some dedicated time really thinking on this. Which of the 4 priorities is underrepresented in the course of your normal weekly activities? What have you unknowingly subtracted from your life's priorities that is keeping you off balance from all that God has in mind for you? He wants to see you thrive. He wants to see you be successful in these priorities. So which of them needs to be, which of the things that you regularly do in your life needs to be taken off the shelf? Which of the 4 areas of priority needs to be taken off the shelf and put back into a place of prominence in your life so that you become more in balance in those 4 areas? Finally, what are you making a bigger priority than you should that's also making balance difficult in your life? Now listen, this is the toughest one. Is there a priority in your life from one of these areas, or maybe something that doesn't really fit in these areas at all, that you've made a really big, capital letters, a really big piece of your life, or your pie, if you will? Does it work? It's getting more attention than maybe it should? Maybe it's church responsibilities. And I would tell you that if that's getting, more of your time and attention, that it's causing you to live life out of balance, you probably ought to scale some of that back. Maybe it's your family. I know that sounds, I'm treading on thin ice here. Your kids' activities. Because in the culture that we live in, if we don't have little Ricky involved in every single opportunity that comes our way, then his life is finished. He's got nothing to look forward to in life. And so maybe it's your kids' activities, it's their sports, it's the dance, gymnastics, music, 4-H, raising animals, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. I don't know, the list just goes on and on and on and on, because there are so many options out there for you to choose from. Listen, I'm past that stage of life, but I live that stage of life. And it's not that far in my rearview mirror. And now I watch my kids as they're trying to manage that stage of life. Listen, here's the thing. I know I say this knowing that it's going to sound a little bit self-serving, but honestly, it's not, because I really gain nothing. I I know what often gets cut out when you have to make those judgment calls between, say, family things or things for your family, your children, so on and so forth, versus a faith or a church or a spiritual thing. I know what gets cut out. A lot of the time, it's the church stuff. When you have to choose between a sport, a game, a practice, a tournament, or a church service, guess what goes? When you have to choose between a dance rehearsal or even recital, that's a little more important than a rehearsal, I get it. It's either that or a children's event at the church. Or you have to choose between a fundraiser for your thing, whatever that may be, or serving in a ministry at the church. I want you to stop and think for a minute, Mom and Dad, about what you're telling your child when you always choose the other thing rather than the spiritual things. Your team, your sport, your raffle, your friend's party, your cookout, or whatever, that you're telling them that those things are more important than things that are spiritual and might even have eternal implications. You're saying, I'll do the spiritual and the church things as long as it doesn't conflict with anything else in our schedule. Unless, it conflicts with you fill in the blank in your world. Here's what I would say to you. That's the subtle message that you're giving them, but would you ever say that to them verbally? Would you actually say that to yourself if you were looking in a mirror? I don't think most of us would do that, because we know, as Christ followers, we know what is most important as it relates to eternity. And I'm not saying that you always choose the church or the spiritual thing. I'm not suggesting that. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying here. Remember, there's balance in all of this. But if you're always choosing the other stuff, I would suggest to you that's not in balance. So 3 questions. What are you adding to your life as it relates to priorities in your life? What have you subtracted from your life? And what are you making a bigger piece of your life than maybe you should? These 3 questions will serve you well in helping to get your life back in better balance, perhaps, with the way that God really desires for you to live. He wants you to live with both purposeful priorities and with balance in those 4 areas of priority. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a minute or 2 to reflect on these 3 questions before we finish today. We're going to put them on the screen for you and maybe put a little, soft music in the background. And I want you to reflect on them. I want you to ask God what you need to do next in your life. Is it add? Is it subtract? Is it reduce? Is it eliminate? Is it just change in some way? So that your priorities become in better balance in your everyday living. So we're going to give you a minute, just wherever you're sitting, just to reflect, pray, ask God, what do you want me to do next? And then we'll close our time together. Well, I hope that God revealed some things to you, and I would encourage you to take more than a minute to really reflect on those questions and to talk about it in your homes, with your spouses, with your kids, and to really allow God to challenge you and move you. Well, I hope that God revealed some things to you about priority and balance in your life. And I hope that you'll take more than just 60 seconds or so to really wrestle with that and have conversation with your husband, your wife, with your families in the coming days to really talk about what is it that God might want you to do so that you could have more purposeful priorities and better balance of them in your life. Well, as always, we want to encourage you, if you need prayer for something today, the option only is to click that link digitally there on your screen, or to let the host know in the chat of things that we can be praying for you. And we would count it a privilege to be able to go before the Lord on your behalf. Additionally, then, I hope that once this weather clears and roads become a little safer to drive, that you'll be out and about, and we'll see you back here next week as we continue with week number 3 of Less is More. Stay safe, and God bless.